Welcome to the Minnesota American Legion Patriots podcast. On this Thursday afternoon, we have a distinguished guest with us, Senator Andrew Lange, along with our Director of Communications, Tim Engstrom. And I tell you what, this is exciting for me because I'm just, well, I can't do that because I got to tell him. We're in the presence of a major. You want to tell us about this military career of yours?
Yeah, so hopefully not much longer, Major. I actually just a month ago finished my, I had an '06 come up to me and tell me that he needed me to do the ILE, the War College Command Center. It's to make '05, and I told him, sir, I think I'm going to retire actually when I get my 20 years, and he's like, you can't do that. I can't have you retire. So I got my arm twisted into doing ILE, and I just finally finished that up, so. Waiting on a senior officer ranking board in the spring, and then hopefully a slot will open up for me. So, yep, I've just went past my 20 years in the Minnesota Army National Guard. Always been a Minnesota Army National Guard guy. I've always been in the aviation realm, except for a little bit of a post-election getting shelved and put as the AHATS commander. But yeah, I've always been. I went to flight school in 2004. Went to the Black Hawk course 2005, so I've always flown for the Minnesota Army National Guard, whether it's been in the 34th Cab or the E Cab now. And then I was in 2nd Battalion 2147, the Assault Helicopter Battalion down here, and now for the last couple of years I have been the medevac commander out of St. Cloud. So we have 3 flight platoons or deployable subunits. It's kind of a mini battalion, really. It's a pretty good-sized company. We have 9 aircraft, well, 10 on the books right now, but 9 aircraft, and it's been a very fast, to be honest with you, 20 years. Got a couple deployments. I was on the 07-08 deployment to Iraq with the 2nd Battalion. Flew our tails off for, I think the numbers were like 24,000 hours. We flew back here with 30 aircraft, so pretty amazing. And then I was supposed to go do my ILE online in Kuwait in 2014, 2015. With the ECAB we went, and it ended up this little group called ISIS decided that I should go back to Iraq. So went back to Iraq for the second time and spent the majority of that tour as liaison officer with the 4501st, which is an Apache battalion, an active duty Apache battalion that was under our Guard Brigade. So it was a pretty interesting tour. Didn't fly a whole lot the second time because I was, I wrote such nice memos. I think they kept me in the office a little bit longer. So, but yeah, so a little over 20 years. Like I said, it's gone really fast, and I still like getting up on a Saturday morning and going to drill and seeing the guys. So I'm sticking it out for the time being.
Oh, that's good. Currently, in your civilian life.
So I actually work for a local EMS. I don't know if I can. It's LifeLink. Yeah. So I fly for LifeLink full time. Well, mostly full time. About half the year I'm spending down in St. Paul, but I work full time. 7 days on, 7 days off in the off season of session, and then I have 2 small boys that are 15 and almost 12, and I've been married for 20 years. So.
Just don't forget the anniversary.
Don't forget the anniversary. I can't. Every year it's the aviation ball, same weekend. So.
Well, you joined the Minnesota Senate back in 2016.
So I won the election in 16, and January 17 we got sworn in. So I've been around now for 5 years. It's already been gone pretty quick.
Vice chair of the Veterans Committee.
So the last 2 years I've been the chair.
Oh, okay. So much for Wikipedia.
Yeah, well, Bruce Anderson was the chair when I first got in, so I was the vice chair under him. And when after the 2020 election, I was given the reins and kind of hit the ground running. You know, it's a good committee to be a part of. It's really nonpartisan. It's been pretty rewarding the last couple of years. You know, we had a good budgetary number, and they hadn't had it'll be 2 years now, the January of the last budget cycle. So, yeah, and then last year, of course, the big news on the street was that we did the Veterans Omnibus Bill. And
which brings me a point. This guy here, our Director of Communications, Tim, before we get into, because there's a lot of questions I have, but tell us how that all came about. Where did this omnibus bill, where'd the idea come from, and how did that happen, and who were the groups involved?
So for many years, a lot of times veterans legislation would die on the vine. The Veterans Restorative Justice Act was successful, but it took 5 years, 6 years before it finally went through in 2021. So, but typically what would happen is things would die in a committee, and not just that bill, but other efforts, and you can talk to anybody else who's up here trying to do the same thing, is that, yeah, it would get through the Veterans Committee, but it would not make it through other committees, or just get, nobody would ever vote against it, but it just wouldn't get forwarded. So the idea was that last year we just were in a specific situation where we felt we could go forward with an omnibus bill and group the items that were being proposed for the veterans legislation, as well as the National Guard related legislation, the Department of Military Affairs, into one bill. And then if we can get an omnibus bill passed, that protects us from being attached to other groups, because a lot of times their interests or these interests, they'll throw a veterans thing on there, so that way it'll be like a political football. And when their thing dies, our stuff dies. And so by having our own bill, we can get through and not be attached to these other things. And it was very successful, because last year, you'll know, a lot of things did not make it out of session. But our items not only made it out of session, they made it out of session 2 weeks before the deadline. So we were sitting comfortably. We had a successful year. And between 2022 and 2021, when a lot of different, including the Restorative Justice Act and other things passed, those are the two most successful years for veterans legislation that almost anybody up here can remember. And and Andrew helped shepherd through both of those efforts.
And
years.
let me. I'm going to start with you with 2 words: poison pill.
Poison pill. Yeah. So it's an interesting thing, really, and Tim's right. So veterans' bills have always been a political football, or leverage, honestly, is what the way it got used. Mainly because senators and House members and both sides of the aisle don't want to vote against a veteran, but they don't want to stand up and argue for him either. So it's kind of been a strange dynamic. You mentioned the Veterans Restorative Justice Act. That was a horrible political football for many years for both sides of the aisle. When it first came out, I think Roger Chamberlain, since I've been around, I don't know what the history was before that, but Roger Chamberlain carried it for a couple of years, and the Democrats wanted nothing to do with it, including some Republicans, like it's crossing the line as far as legal precedent, and I think I heard some people say that is you're treating veterans differently than other people. You're treating them specially. And I said, well, they are different and they are special. So that was the argument we used. And at the end of the day, I think Representative Feist and myself were actually the key author, the main authors, but it had been carried back and forth, and one side didn't like it, and then the other side didn't like it, in several different versions. So I think the version that we got passed off the floor in 21 was it's a successful version. I think it's a good compromise model, and hopefully, over the next few years, we start hearing some of the stories from guys that came back, experienced it, and were successful. So when it comes to the omnibus bill, I was probably a little tight-lipped about that in 22. For a change, I didn't have AT in June that year, I had it in May. And that was a really good piece of leverage for me to say, hey, as the vets chair, we need to do this early because I'm not going to be here. And Jeff Howe says, well, I could do it after. And I said, no, Jeff, we're going to do it early. And I don't know if you know, Lieutenant Colonel retired Howe, Jeff Howe is senator up on the Hill too. And I'm like, no, Jeff, just let it be. We're going to get it figured out early. So I brought with some of the little behind the scenes stuff here as I was working through all the bills. And I just took photocopies of these, but I took pictures of it, and it's like, I sat down with the Commissioner Herkey and said, okay, what do we really need? Like, when it comes to brass tacks, because I'm going to be arguing for dollars here. Like, what's your top priorities, and what are because they come to the committee and they're like, everything's a top priority. Everything needs to happen.
Oh yeah.
So of the list of bills that we heard, this turns into this. I'm sorry, these 3 pages turn into this, and this is the tentative agreement that we had May 3rd which was, a month early almost. So, and I love rubbing it in that Rob said tentative. He had to write it right on there, tentative per leadership approval, which, the Senate Republicans and the caucus that we had, I was kind of given the go ahead, mainly because of to be honest, there was so far apart on the rest of the budgetary items that I think the caucus kind of looked at, well, this is something that can be done.
And you're talking about Rob Eklund, your
Counterpart
on the House, yeah.
Yep. And Rob and I, we get along real well. Obviously, he's a good dude from the northern part of the state, and he kept saying, well, we need to get this done. We need to get this done, and I'm like, let me work behind the scenes. I got AT early this year. I need to get to AT and go spend it up at Camp Ripley, and we'll get this bill done early off the floor. Now, what you said, being a political football, I don't think that goes away with a veterans omnibus bill. I'm actually, I talked to the MAG group today and said there needs to be some, when you have the Vets Day on the Hill, they always advocate for the bills. Now, when you go advocate for those bills, we talk to both sides of the aisle and say, it's not just what's in the bill, but you need to keep this clean. You need to keep this vets bill.
Absolutely.
Because, again, there was amendments on the table when we took it to the floor. Stuff, from my opinion, that doesn't belong in a vets bill. I have nothing against Meals on Wheels. I truly don't. But I don't think Meals on Wheels, and then you put the word veteran at the end of it, and it counts as a vets bill. So
Right.
there's some parenting that needs to be done.
Yeah, we
Well,
wanna keep
obviously,
this-
they're trying to turn the tables, and I can only recall, that's why I brought up poison pill,
Yeah.
the hours that I spent in committee, and then a bill had come to the floor, and you just virtually could not vote for it because it was a bad bill, but there was a veterans provision attached to it, so the first thing that happens, they use it politically against you.
Yep.
And I, for one, am saying that as long as a veterans bill, omnibus bill, is a veterans bill, you don't have a right or a left. You have veterans with veterans needs, and that's how we move it forward. And we do not let people attach things
Right.
to it.
And that takes commitment from both sides of the aisle. That was the thing. It's in 21 there was a lot of Democrats that would come to me and say, we need to do this as an omnibus bill. And I said, oh, in my dreams, I would love that. But the practicality of it was, tested this year when we went to the floor, it had that bill, and there was amendments at the table, and I walked right back over to the same Democrats that begged for the omnibus the year prior and said, remember what you asked for here. And, we're going to keep this clean now, aren't we?
Well, and the idea of an omnibus bill definitely was being talked about in 2021, even back at the end of 2020, about if we only had an omnibus bill. Then last year, in 2021, we thought about it, and then this year we were like, let's go for it. But the idea is to not just have it be a one-year thing. If we can get it to be a two-year thing, it starts a precedence, and then we can make it an every-year thing. Well, there's always a veterans omnibus bill. Why would we not do this? And then, of course, it comes down to keeping it clean so it doesn't become with all these riders and poison pills and things like that. The other thing I just want to say is that the American Legion had such a crucial role in the recent success that we've had. You guys, we sent out this email blast to 40,000 Legionnaires. We have more Legionnaires than that, but that's the ones we have their email address for. And you guys got so much response that seemed like, boom, right after we sent that out on a Monday, and by the end of the week, the whole stuff was passed. Or maybe it was the following week, but it was really fast, because there was people commenting about how they were hearing from so many veterans up at the Capitol.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So the
the
Legion
Vets Day
did that.
kind of leading up to Vets Day on the Hill, and I did make comment to this Vets Day on the Hill should probably be a little earlier in session. We're working on the bills, not, and
Well, and then between the emails that we were sending out, telling veterans about it, as well as putting stuff in the Minnesota Legionnaire, and then Veterans Day on the Hill, having a presence there, I always say one of the best ways to get legislation done is, it's one thing to be the lobbyist or advocate standing there, but it's another if the lawmakers hear from their constituents, like the veterans. So the more that we can educate our constituents, the better they can push for legislation in their hometown to get passed.
Does that make a difference for you, Senator, when you
So absolutely, we have Wilmer, Minnesota is where I grew up and live, and I live just south of town now. But just, what was it, a week ago Monday, sat with a pretty darn big group of vets. They have coffee every other Monday morning. And, kind of just went through what the vets bill had in it, what the omnibus was, explained the process a little bit. And, talked about some of the priorities, from both the Legion, the MDVA, or whoever it may be as far as the groups go. But, what those things look like when we talk about homestead tax exclusion, that's kind of been a big one.
Sure.
Basing it on, I think the discussion about the disability rating 30 through 100% should be correlated to some of that
Right.
Tax reduction when it comes to not just the service member, but the spouse as well. So, just little ideas and kind of taking little bites of the apple as we go forward, which we've been doing, but.
On an earlier podcast, we had our legislative chair, Eric Allness,
Oh, yep.
with us. He brought up one thing that I'm curious to throw out at you.
Sure.
The Hastings VA home
Yep. We discussed that this morning. A little bit.
drastically needs
Mhm.
help.
Yep. So I made a commitment to Senator Jerry Newton, who is now going to be a House member, I think. I don't know, had to leave the Senate, but I did make a commitment to him, and this was regarding the 3 new vets homes in the state of Minnesota, as far as Monty, Preston, and Bemidji that we built, which was an unprecedented thing as well. Actually, it was kind of unprecedented to get the federal government to help as much as they did. That was
Yeah.
the big move. But I made the commitment to him then. I said, I know that Minneapolis and Hastings are in need, and I'll do what I can, after, because he was a hesitant supporter, I would say. Jerry was. So, but yeah, the Hastings is right up there. I was kind of hoping to have bonding money for it. So.
That's the idea, is that one would not be in the Veterans Omnibus Bill because it's going to be an infrastructure project, and
Yep.
so it would be through bonding.
Right.
Um,
Right.
What do you think the chances of getting a second year Veterans Omnibus Bill passed this
Good,
session?
I think. I mean, like I said, it's going to require some guard dog duty on it, but I
Sure.
think we could do it. Yeah, it'll be a budgetary year, so it'll be a bigger dollar figure too. So.
At the CTF meetings, they talk a lot about that precedence point I made. Is that, do you feel that that's an accurate statement? Or
Oh yeah,
if we
I
get
think
2, then we
that
can get it
the legislature as a whole, both sides of the aisle, I talked about that kind of on and off, and some of the old guard, I would say that in the Minnesota Senate we're losing a minimum of 22 senators this year.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say losing, retiring,
Redistricting.
choosing not to run. So
Yeah.
there'll be a minimum of 22. So it's all of a sudden, being the freshman senator that I was for the last 6 freshman years, all of a sudden now it's like, God, I'm one of the older guys already. And I think that the intention with the Veterans Bill and putting it with the state gov bill always was good. But yeah, like I said, I think the precedent has been set. I think the precedent for keeping it clean has been set. We do that with other bills too. Lessard Sam's is the Outdoor Heritage Council, Outdoor Heritage Fund
Yeah.
bill is a great example of something where we just don't mess with it. We take the recommendation of the board and the chair, and we pretty much hit. I mean, there's been some tweaks, dollar figures where the budget goes up or whatever.
Sure.
we don't add whole other programs?
We don't add programs. And there's other. I'm trying to think of like LCCMR, the Legislative Commission. That one always gets messed with. And I think once the precedent is set, and you bring that bill, and you have a signed agreement between both chairs, and the governor takes a look at it, which he did, and everybody was good with before we went to the floor. And I think that's, it was pretty open. It was pretty transparent.
Let me ask you a couple of other things here. Gambling and the money that appears to be sucked out of, the livelihood and the existence of certain posts throughout, I would say pretty much all the posts throughout the state of Minnesota, comes from that gambling fund.
Yeah.
But yet our legislature seems to keep pulling more and more and more out of it, which keeps us from reinvesting that money into our own local communities, into youth programs, into that. Is there a way to stop this? Is there a way to?
Sure. The gambling board, we've had discussions and run-ins with those guys. They're very protective of their gambling dollars, I would say. I think in the next legislative session, you might have an opportunity like you haven't had in a while to really take a crack at those numbers and the percentages and start giving, keeping some of that money at each post. So obviously, you've probably seen that I've signed on to several bills like that. And personally, my opinion is that any dollar you can keep at the post, that the post earns or makes, or percentages of those, what if they're tickets or online, the digital gaming stuff that's been so controversial with the tribes and some other racetracks, everybody's kind of nodding their head going, yep. But I think.
James, do you want to say something here? Your head has just been going crazy over there.
My post just paid $20,000 today to the state on for the last month.
Property tax?
No.
Oh.
Just in gambling taxes.
Okay.
And so that's, if we had, that's more money that we could have given to youth sports in the Kennedy High School area.
Mm-hmm.
Which brings up the other point, property tax relief for, the veterans organizations.
Yep. We've talked. That has definitely been broached as well. And especially with, post World War II, and this is something that we've kind of discussed several times, and just the sheer number of vets is declining.
Mm-hmm.
We have a 20-year cycle now where most patch-going guys that are in the military now, are getting out. They're retiring. I mean, everybody's seen the retention rates within the state of Minnesota, not just because of personal reasons or anything like that where you normally see it, but it's been, I've done my 20 years, I've done my 3, 4, 5, 6 tours. I'm tired. I'm not going to make it 30.
Right.
So you see some of that, and I think that goes into a lot in these legions, being smaller and being less people. Probably need a little more help than what they used to. So. But
Sure.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, what do you see for the upcoming legislative session?
Opportunity. To be honest, I'm very optimistic about what happens. And this is, it's probably a little partisan to say that, but I think that you have a lot of friends on the Republican side. That's true, and I don't think it's diminishing anything that any other buddy has done. But you have a bunch of service members actually in the legislature now that we haven't had in a while. Duckworth, myself, Anderson, Howe, Jasinski. Trying to think.
Yeah, Duckworth was in Boise State as well. He's a Boise State graduate.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have advocates like we haven't had in a while. So.
Well, and it's been a couple of years since we've passed the bonding bill, so I think there'll be some urgency with that as well.
We'll probably get 2 bonding bills. If I was a betting man, which I'm not, but if I was, I would say that we'll probably get one early in session because there is some deadlines that are going to be coming out. You'll see it updated faster, and it'll look a lot like the bonding bill that we had at the table at the end of last year. So. Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for that, and
Yeah, that's fine. No, just set it right there. That'd be fine. Well, that's good. I mean, it's exciting. It's great to have you here, with us. Tim, any final questions or comments before we?
Just lean on the American Legion anytime you need help with getting veterans legislation passed. We work both sides of the aisle, and we're happy that we have so many veterans that are in the legislature. I think that this next year is going to be a really strong one for everyone involved. I think we've got great momentum over these past 2 years, and there's no reason that it can't continue. So, we were able to get a signed letter from all members of the Minnesota congressional delegation. And this was in relation to some emergency transportation billing problem that the VA has had. And so no other organization can claim that they've got a signed letter from both senators.
4 Republicans and 4 Democrats.
Yeah. So, it's just amazing. And, we try our best to, the party that we belong to is the Veterans Party. And And we appreciate all the support that the Republicans give us
Right.
all the time.
And it's, if anybody watches the veterans committees, I would say that it's pretty nonpartisan. To be honest.
Absolutely. And the Democrats that give us, anytime we can get them to come together, both sides have said that we're almost like the last nonpartisan thing, like even road construction's now getting
Sure. James, you shook your head up and down, back and forth. You got anything you want to say to the senator?
No, this has been good, but I'm wondering, what's going through my head is how many flights you could have been my pilot in Iraq.
Ooh. When were you there?
2005 to 2008.
So I was there 07, 08 out of Balad. I spent some time in Basra. And then in 2014, 2015, I got to spend it all at Haji.
Oh. I've been to both places, but I was up Al-Assad and
Okay.
the western half out there. So.
Well, it's interesting because when Eric was here, I told him the story about how General Nash
Yep.
knew my father very, very well.
Oh, really?
My father was a 38-year veteran, World War II, Korea. General Nash went in the same year I went in. He went up the ranks, and my dad said, you're not going to be one of those officers. But we were talking about him flying up to Camp Ripley when I was senator,
Yeah.
taking me up there. And Eric was up there at the same time. So our paths cross. And it's amazing who you bump into and
Oh,
everything.
yeah.
But,
Well, I got a great story of how I was in Taji, and we had no security element whatsoever. And we flew in there in a C-130, and it was like, as a 39-year-old, Minnesota guy that's never locked and loaded, it was like a new experience for me. Like, what am I doing? And the security group that came out, some wise guy walked up to me and goes, "Red Bull Patch, you from Minnesota?" And I said, "Yeah." "Where are you from in Minnesota?" And I said, "Well, it's a small town in western Minnesota. You wouldn't know it." He goes, "Try me." "Well, it's Olivia, Minnesota." He goes, "That's where I grew up." And I said, "Well, it's a small world." Turns out I know his dad, and his dad was the recruiter out in Olivia for a long time.
oh, wow.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they provided the security and made us sleep a little bit easier at night. Those guys
I
did.
hear
So.
you. Senator Andrew Lange and our Director of Communications have been our guests this week on the Minnesota American Legion Patriots podcast. James Holcren and I invite you to join us again next week. And in the meantime, be the one.
Hey, good job.
Yeah.